My name is Carrie, and I'm the Executive Director of the Smart Building Center. Oops. Okay, and I don't want to keep you in waiting too long for our introductory speaker, our opening remarks from Dawn Lindell of Seattle City Light. I'm going to do a little intro for you, Dawn. Dawn just joined us recently as the new General Manager and CEO of Seattle City Light. She has 20 years of utility experience in electric distribution and transmission, water, wastewater, and gas. Before coming to City Light, Dawn served as the general manager at Burbank Water and Power, setting strategic direction and delivering water, power, and business high-speed internet to the media capital of the world. She has experience leading 2 federal multi-state regional transmission utilities, serving as a transformational chief information officer at both municipal and federal utilities, and leading customer service at a large municipal utility to a top quartile J.D. Power customer service performance. Dawn has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree in business administration with a focus on information technology from the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. Thank you so much, Dawn, for being here today, and I'm going to welcome you on up here.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here this morning and have the opportunity to talk with you about one of my favorite topics, electricity, which underlies everything everyone does at home and at work. And so I love this topic. I've dedicated my life to it, so I better love it, huh? And I'm happy to share some thoughts with you on it. So first, a little bit about Seattle City Light. So we have about 500,000 electric meters, and of course each one of those is attached to a customer or customer group through their building, and we serve a little over 9 million megawatt hours a year. The bulk of our customers, 451,000 of them, are residential, and we have about 52,000 commercial and industrial customers. So it looks like most of the energy would be going residential, but in fact, most of it goes to the commercial and industrial. So about 60% of our load comes from commercial and industrial, and the rest from residential. The coolest thing I think about this utility is I believe it was the first utility in the nation to reach carbon neutrality way back in 2005. And that's carbon neutrality not only in the energy that we deliver, but also in how we operate. So my travel, for instance, when I fly to a conference, we offset that carbon that is for my plane trip. We offset the carbon for our large trucks because we don't have electric replacements for those yet. So for those, we also buy credits and offset that carbon. So both operationally and generationally, we are carbon neutral. This is our mix of resource. So the blue up here is the City Light owned hydropower that we own, operate, manage, and when we can, we also sell to help offset some of our costs. The green is the power that we get from Bonneville Power, and that's about almost 42% of our total. That's mostly hydropower. It's a little bit of nuclear. And then also they occasionally have to supplement off of the market to meet their load. We've got a brown section up there that is our own market purchase or unspecified power. That's power we offset because we don't know the origin of it. And we have to buy power off the market when we don't have enough power that we have from our hydropower or from Bonneville or from our wind or a little section of other that I'll get to in a minute. When we don't have that power, enough power to serve this community and the other 8 surrounding communities that we serve electricity to. And so that happens on really hot days and it happens on really cold days. Most recently, we had a section in June where we had some heat and we needed to do a fair amount of purchasing. And then we also had Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, which was, as you will see later in the presentation, a real spike for us in usage. It also happens when we have to take something offline to work on it. So again, that would be another time when we do that purchasing. The other up there is our long-term contracts for small amounts of megawatts and things like biomass. And you don't see solar up there. We have just recently done some purchase power agreements on solar. Those solar fields should come online in 2025. So this looks at a map of where's our stuff. So the blue dots up there are the hydropower that we own, kind of keeping with our theme, our color theme. And you can see those run along rivers, as you would expect. The red dot at the top, excuse me, is some power that we receive through an international treaty between the US and Canada, believe it or not. And we get to bring in power that way. The black dots, including several on Columbia River system, as well as way down here at Lucky Peak in Idaho, those are long-term hydropower contracts that we have. Obviously, primarily it's going to be Bonneville, and then our other long-term contracts there as well. So this is the story I have to tell you today. And if we look at this graph and you look at the x-axis along the bottom, what you see are years from 2010 to 2044. On the y-axis, we've got average megawatts for our average load, and then we've got megawatts for our peak load. Every 2 years, we do a 20-year outlook on what we expect electricity usage to be. And boy, what a difference 2 years makes. So 2 years ago, when we were looking at this, if we look at this bottom sort of brighter blue line, this is our historical annual energy usage. And you can see it's mostly flat. And it actually even dips down a bit in 2020. What happened in 2020? Exactly, COVID, everybody went home. Our biggest energy load comes from commercial and industrial usage, so we saw that drop off. And it's not made up by what people used in residential. So we saw a dip there. And so we'd had this long-term trend. And our forecasters at that point thought, well, you know, it seems like we're offsetting in conservation what we're seeing increase in use. And so we think it's just going to stay flat. And now 2 years later, we have reassessed that. And we are actually looking at a 70% increase in load from transportation, increase in transportation load than we were looking at 2 years ago. And transportation includes electric vehicles. 26.2% of vehicles sold in Seattle, 1 out of every 4, a little more than 1 out of every 4, are EVs today. So that curve is on the real uptrend, and it's moving faster, a lot faster than it was 2 years ago. But we've also got Port of Seattle electrification, additional high-speed rail, et cetera. So we're seeing a real increase in average load there. That's what we have to aim for kind of in the middle. That's our average use. But you all want power, especially on really hot days and really cold days. So we've got to serve that no matter what the weather and no matter what draw we're seeing. So we've really got to be able to serve to the peak load. And that's the top right here. So these are our historical peaks. Beeps, yeah, we peep when it peaks. So anyway, these are our historical peaks, and it's a lot bumpier line because it just depends, again, it's kind of weather dependent. And that's again what it has looked like. But overall, it's bumpy, but it's kind of stayed in a range. That is no longer the case. We've seen a significant change in that in the last 4 years. And I'll show you that in just a minute. Now, as we look out over what we expect our peak energy usage to be, even with conservation, taking into account additional conservation, we are still seeing that grow significantly. So, this graph, or chart, I guess, over here on the left, we've got the source, the potential source of energy. Where are we going to draw energy from when we need to put it on the load? We've listed batteries here, and I want to talk a little bit about batteries because battery is not generation. Whatever we pull from that battery, just like your phone, you use it all day, then the little bars go, in case of mine, it's an older phone, I have to charge it 2 or 3 times a day, but the little bars go down and I have to replenish it before I can use it again. But it will help us potentially put energy on the grid when we need it most. So we've got battery up there, and we've got solar and solar plus battery, and you can see wind, enhanced geothermal, et cetera. As I mentioned, every 2 years we do that outlook. So in 2022, which is the first 3 columns, these, when we looked out in 2022 for the next 10 years, we expected to have to add about 400 megawatts over that 10-year period. 2 years later, that total that we need to add is now 1,825. It's gone up by a factor of more than 4. So we've got a lot of energy to source, and we've got a lot more energy that we need to deliver. In addition to that 1,825 megawatts that we have to add, we are going to find another 120 megawatts of conservation over and above that. So the actual need is closer to 5 times the load, but we're going to bring some of that load down through conservation efforts. Okay. This is also part of our challenge. So what this shows on the y-axis, oops, crap, sorry. All right, I hate it when I do that. All right, so here we've got the dollars per megawatt hour off the market for power. So when we have to go to the market and buy power, that's how much it costs. And it's a market, just like a stock market. It goes up and it goes down depending on supply and demand. On the x-axis down here, we've got years again from 2001 up through 2024, where we are today. Each one of these little blue lines, if we could zoom in really close, you'd see each one is a line, and it represents a day in that year. And it shows the actual price for power on average in the Northwest on that day. So this is a Northwest view of the power market. How were we impacted by what was going on in the market? So way back here in 2001, what happened? Enron. So Enron caused this huge spike with their false market ploys, and it hit us hard. We had a big spike. That was a big wake-up moment for utilities. So from that moment on, we rethought how we budget and prepare for our power needs on the really hot days and the really cold days. And we started hedging. We started buying power in advance and preparing ourselves budget-wise so that when we had a big spike, we were going to be ready to handle it. Then we went on for 20 years, almost 20 years, pretty smoothly. The hedging worked. We didn't see big power cost spikes. Occasionally we'd have a weather event. We had a February storm in 2014 that caused a little bit of a spike, but not as big as Enron. Until we hit 2019, we had a pipeline, a British Columbia pipeline rupture. Gas pipeline, of course, a lot of energy is generated through gas turbines, and so that caused a spike because there was a concern that we weren't going to have enough gas, right? It's just economics. But let's take a look at the last 4 years. This is climate change. This is the difference. So what we have seen in the last 4 years are weather events that are stronger, they last longer, and they cover a wider region of land. So prior to that, a storm might hit, and it might hit south of Seattle pretty hard, but it might not hit us that hard. Or it might hit Seattle really hard, but maybe not as much south. And we could trade energy even locally to help cover that difference. It is harder to do that because when the storm covers, or the weather impact, the heat dome, the cold spell, when that hits and covers a wide area, we're all looking for power. And again, it's supply and demand. Suddenly there's a huge demand for power and there's not enough, and we're all going to the market trying to buy that same power. And so these weather events, again, this is the Northwest perspective, so I'm going to point that out again. And the reason I say that is, here was the 2020 California heat wave. Now, if you are in the Northwest, you see this market spike, but it's not that big. But if you were in Southern California, that was spiking to $2,000 a megawatt hour during that time. Here is the Texas winter event in 2021. It was President's Day weekend in 2021. Utilities there spent their entire annual energy budget in one weekend. Not a huge impact here in the Northwest, but even here, far from Texas, we saw a little bit of a spike. Here is, let's see, what is this one? This one is the 2021 heat dome that hit in the Northwest. Now we're seeing prices that are higher or as high as Enron. Suddenly we're seeing a huge spike. Very significant impact to Seattle City Light's financial situation. Here is the California 2022 heat wave. What's the difference between that one and 2020? In 2020, California wasn't as prepared to go hard after market resources earlier. In 2022, they were a lot smarter, and they said, we've got to have resource adequacy. And when that weather got projected, they went to market early and started grabbing in power to help offset that. And they bought from every completely up the coast as well as over the western area, and that drove the price up for us as well. Then here, we've got in 2023, we had a December, well, actually it was December of 2022, just before 2023, we had a real hard cold spell here. And so what happened for Seattle City Light and for neighboring utilities is that December is our hardest month for hydropower. We're getting some snow, but it's not melting, and we're really in replenish mode. We've used it up, and so we had to go to market when that cold spell hit. And again, we're all trying to buy power, and that drives that price right on up. Then we've got the August 23 heat wave, and finally the January 24. This is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend this year. Now, Seattle City Light's marketing team, they're just an amazing group of people. We were prepared for this. We had actually saved megawatts of water. We had bought a lot of solar power from California because it was available right before then, and we were able to save our water and use our water generated megawatts to meet most of our need. In fact, we actually sold into the market in there and helped some of our neighboring utilities. But even then, there were some hours we had to buy. But overall, we broke even. We actually made $14,000, which sounds like a lot in my personal budget, but is not much in terms of billions and millions, right? So neighboring utilities went in the hole 35 million and 50 million from that event. So in part we got lucky, and in part we planned well. We will always plan well, but we may not always have that luck on our side. So just be aware that we are watching that. Okay, so what are we doing about this? Gosh, it's kind of grim. You need a whole bunch more power, and it's going to cost a lot. Oh, one more thing back here. I wanted to show the average for 20 years from 2001 to 2020, average price on the market, $38. Last 4 years, price on the market, $80, more than double. on average. So it's just getting more and more expensive. So what are we doing? Well, we are exploring, we've got to, because we've got a lot of power that we've got to put ourselves in long-term contracts or be prepared to increase generation and the transmission that goes with it. 1,800 megawatts. That cannot all be solar, wind, and batteries because it's too weather dependent and we may not have it when we need it. But some of it, a good chunk of it will be solar, wind, and batteries. But we need additional baseload resources. There is no help for that. And so what is a baseload resource? It is a resource that's available to us 7/24, 365 days a year. So hydropower, we can run day or night. Solar, we can only run while the sun shines. Wind, we can only run while the wind blows. But we can definitely store some of that energy and use it later. So hydropower, small modular reactors are a carbon-free resource. Geothermal, which is in the picture on the left. Well, it's not really geothermal power, but you get the idea. It's heat coming from the earth. And, we've got a lot of volcanoes near here. Is there opportunity for us to find some geothermal and then potentially build to bring it in? Maybe. Snohomish has been trying. They tried this, and they were not successful in identifying a steady geothermal source. Because again, if we're going to spend all that money, we got to know it's going to last and that we're going to be able to live off of it. Over to the right is a picture of hydrogen. And we can potentially use hydrogen. Here's the downside of hydrogen. It takes 3 megawatts of solar or wind or small modular reactor, some kind of green power, cleaner power, carbon-free power, to make 1 megawatt's worth of hydrogen. So how much does that cost? 4 times. 4 times the cost. But sometimes solar is really cheap. Earlier this week, I think it was on Monday, we were able to buy $12 per megawatt energy solar from the south for about 10 minutes. We bought. Didn't last a long time, but again, those marketers, they're all over that. But when we can have middle of the day cheaper solar, it may make sense to make hydrogen, store it, and then run that kind of power when we need it. It's expensive, but it's an option. We also, I mentioned earlier, we have recently done 2 purchase power agreements for solar. Both of them are in Oregon, and both they were slated to both come on in 2025, but now it looks like one is going to already slide to 2026 before it can be built. It's a supply chain issue. We're still seeing the supply chain issues. But we are also currently sourcing some wind. And it's my experience, both in Southern California and here, that is just grinding work, and it's a lot of work. And we will typically go after 4 purchase power agreements and win 1 of 4. Because again, everybody needs this, right? Everybody in the West, especially in Washington, needs, and it's a good thing. Everyone's going to carbon neutral power, but that's driving the price up, and it's also making it harder to find. So let's talk conservation for a little bit. So this is a graph that on the bottom has years again. We're really big on years on the bottom. In case you haven't noticed, at Seattle City Light, it's really helpful to look at things over time. And then this is, I'm pretty sure it's actually megawatts of conservation. doesn't have what it is, but yeah, average megawatts. Yep, average megawatts of conservation. So we have been way ahead of the curve here in terms of going hard after lighting and converting lighting over, and then we get that savings from then on. But we've only captured it here the year in which it occurs. And you can see towards the end, it's fading off. And that's not because we're not conserving from what we've already converted. It's because there's not enough to convert anymore. We've already grabbed those savings. This is non-lighting savings over the same time period. This red is from a utility consortium and some programs that we worked together starting in, it looks like maybe 2010. And the savings we've achieved from that. And this top one I want to talk about, this orange, that is behavior-based change. So it's people making choices to conserve, not necessarily, meaning choosing to use less. What we need to do in order to help us over the next 20 years of huge increases in energy load, we need to drive people to use energy that is not at our peak time of day. Because we've got to build to supply energy to that peak. And if we can shave that peak and bring it down, that's less investment that we need to make. And everything we do goes into rates. We have one source of revenue, it is our rates. And so, and it's a zero-sum game. We are a nonprofit organization. We have no profit at all. We only collect rates to cover the costs. And we can see the energy costs have more than doubled, and we've got to buy a whole lot more energy. So if we can get that peak shaved, that is super helpful. Where we're behind on, really ahead in lighting, but where we're behind is in incenting people to use energy not at our peak. And our peak time of day is between 4 and 8 p.m. And if you think about it, what do y'all do between 4 and 8 p.m., or most of you? You go home after a long day working, you're gonna flip on the TV, you're gonna, or music or something, you're going to start cooking on your hopefully electric stove. You might throw in a load of laundry, and then you gotta dry that laundry. And you're using a ton of electricity. So our usage goes way up. If it's been an extremely cold day, you probably walk into a colder place and you flip your heat up. If it's been an extremely hot day, you walk into your place and you turn that AC on if you have it. If you don't have it, you're probably at least turning on a fan, right? And so again, we're seeing that load really rise during that time. We can take some lessons from California here. What we would like to, and if you have an EV, you probably plug it into charge. Please don't do that until 8. Charge by all means, get an EV, and don't charge it until 8 o'clock if you're charging at home. So we can take some lessons, I think, from south of here. We are going to continue as more and more solar gets added to the nationwide grid. We're going to see prices really drop in the middle of the day when solar production is high. So let's super cool the home in the morning. Then you hit 4, turn off the AC, and for 4 hours live off your earlier investment with cheap energy that's plentiful. That kind of thing. So also, we are going to implement time of use rates in October of 2025. All right, I got applause. That almost never happens. So 2025 October, we're gonna have an opt-in program. This is gonna let us work out the kinks and let people who are front runners and leaders in conservation go ahead and make use of that. In October-ish of 2026, we are gonna do an opt-out program. We're going to put everybody in time of use, and we're going to have people call us if they don't want to be in it. That is what SMUD did, Sacramento Municipal Utility, and they saw a huge benefit from that in terms of their conservation. We've got to have a huge benefit. 1,800 more megawatts is more than our average right now. So we've got to find ways to get that conservation maxed. Okay, the other thing I need to just bring your awareness to is Seattle's an old city, and we have a beautiful electric grid that is ancient. You may have noticed an outage or two, depending on where you live. Our reliability is worse than average. I don't like being below average. Have never been that in my life. So I think we need to fix our reliability issue. A lot of that is tied to a really great sales job 50 or 60 years ago on something called direct buried cable. Now, the other utilities that I've been a part of have mostly buried lines, but what typically in the industry we've done is we bury our conductor inside of a conduit. And the reason you do that is when the conductor gets old or breaks or animal eats through it, deadly for the animal, but annoying for people who are losing their power, we can tie the new conductor to the old conductor, and we roll it on through, and we can replace it. It's not a big deal. But the sales guy from 50 or 60 years ago sold us on direct buried cable. No conductor, cheaper. We bought a lot of it. 330 miles of Seattle's system is direct buried cable. We can't attach and pull through. We have to dig up every inch of that cable. All of it, 100% of it, is past due for replacement. And so for those neighborhoods, and it's all over the city, the whole surrounding of the city is this direct buried cable. We are going to have to replace it. There's no help for it. And the cost of that is over $2 billion with a B dollars. It looks like that will be, all by itself, a 2% rate increase per year from 2026 to 2035. So once we figured that out just a couple months ago, I thought I should start talking about it because it's an ugly thing. We will not, by the way, be replacing it with direct buried cable. We will be replacing it the right way with cable and conduit. So in 60 years, whoever's in this seat will not have to have the same hard conversation. We also need to build transmission. Wherever we are building and adding generation, we are going to likely have to put in transmission. The grid is really, everyone has to add energy just like we are, and the grid's going to get overwhelmed. Okay, so with that, I wanted to talk about some building partnerships, and I'm going to have to use my really excellent notes prepared by staff because, well, that part I know really well from 20 years. I'm still new to the area, and I want to get this part right. So Seattle City Light is a supporter of the Building Potential Program, formerly known as the Northwest Energy Efficiency Council. And together we are working on a future with more energy efficiency policies and programs and technologies that create jobs and foster economic growth and environmental impact. It's where the partnership for utilities with service providers and technologies becomes key. We've got building operator certification training that we are supporting that's now being expanded to include a training and a certification for multifamily building operators. We also fund and support city and state mandates like energy tune-ups and benchmarking and performance standards, and we're doing that through through our support of the Energy Benchmarking and Technical Assistance Help Desk and the Tool Lending Library. Now, I'll share a quick story on the Tool Lending Library. I love this concept. So about maybe 15 years ago, I was a chief information officer at Colorado Springs Utilities, and Boulder was really doing a lot of press on them being a smart city. And they had added a little device to every home that cost $200 per home to put in. So guess who would be paying for that? Each homeowner. So $200 to put in, and it would let consumers see their energy use every day, all day long. And the idea was, well, people will see their energy use and they'll change their habits. What happened is everyone was really excited about that for about the first month, paid attention, changed their habits, forgot about the device, and when they went back in 6 months later, almost all of the batteries had died. And the people hadn't even noticed, right? Because why? Well, because they have to get up, make breakfast, get the kids to school, go to work, do a great job and be amazing at work, come home, get the kids through their homework, make dinner, get the kids to bed, do their own homework. They don't, I love energy, but they don't have time to look at it every day. Plus, they already were achieving the savings. The lending library idea, at least in Colorado, came from that event. I actually had to defend why we weren't doing it to our mayor at the time, who told me, Dawn, I want us to be a smarter city than Boulder, and we got to get those devices. And I said, well, can we give it 6 months and see how it goes? Let's just see how it goes. And so after we did that, he was like, well, we are smarter than Boulder. I'm like, yeah, we are. We've got the money savings and we can do the energy savings. And we actually did a lending library at that point, because you can put the devices on, then you can change the habits, and you don't have to leave them on all the time. So I love that. Let's see, what else? So we're reducing pollution, we're improving the quality of life, and creating local jobs, and partnering with community organizations like the Seattle Housing Authority and the Housing Development Consortium allows City Light to promote equity and bolster affordable housing development, while working on increasing adoption and implementation of building energy and efficiency to low and middle income multifamily buildings. You may not know this, but typically low and middle income buildings use more energy because they haven't had the updates. And so we need that conservation, and we also want to help them save some money. We regularly engage with organizations like the Smart Building Center to ensure we're meeting customers' needs beyond providing power. We want to listen to what we're doing right. We want to hear what we could do better so that we can know better and do better. So some of the City Light programs include a new early design assistance program for multifamily and commercial new construction in the new year with Willdan, and it's going to look a lot like SnowPUD's and Puget Sound Energy's early design assistance program, so we're learning from our neighbors. Technical resources and training are available on topics ranging from HVAC controls to green building tax credits. You can visit the Lighting Design Lab to access all of our resources and to sign up for future offerings. And so with that, I will stop talking. If you've got time.
You can take 5 minutes.
Okay. All right, I hear we're taking 5 minutes for questions. So for those of you who are morning people, yes. What the direct buried problem. Oh, direct buried. Yes, I'm so glad. Yes, thank you. I'm really glad you mentioned EV charging, because I forgot to mention that when I talked about the transportation electrification. We've done a couple of studies, and they're scary. So the first study showed us that we were going to need 8,000 new EV chargers by 2030. So, we thought, well, I don't know if that's right. We should probably look again. The second study showed that we needed 11,000 EV chargers by 2030. So you're exactly right. And one of the things that the city is doing well most of the time is we are also coordinating between departments on when we dig up, so that you don't have to have the same street dug up multiple times, which is expensive and annoying to the people who live there. And we're partnering with SDOT on doing some EV charging programs as well. So great question, thank you. Yes?
Is Seattle City Light planning to incentivize natural gas reduction?
Okay, so the question is Seattle City Light planning to incentivize natural gas reduction? That is a really trickier question than it sounds, because we actually have some rules that prevent us from directly incentivizing the conversion of energy. You can imagine that the natural gas lobby would be not in favor of that. But we can incent people, if they are making the change, to use a more efficient replacement. And so by doing that, we're able to talk a lot about that. And that, I think, provides some encouragement without breaking any laws for us. So it's a little bit of a dance on it. So great question. And you would think the answer would have been a ready yes, but no. No, it is not. Yeah. Oh, wait, here, right here.
I'm wondering, so you said the commercial and industrial load is about 60%. That was the average megawatts?
Yeah.
How much of it is the peak?
Oh, yeah, it's way more steady, and it actually starts to taper off sometimes depending on if the operation is 7x24 or not. However, what I want to add to that is we are developing a demand response rate for our large industrial users who, if they would back off for a few hours for us, could help make a big difference on those really peak days. It's something that they've asked for, and we are working on that now. So in addition to time of use, we're going to do a demand response rate for large industrial. Great question. Yeah.
Will the time of use implement a demand charge?
Try that question again.
Oh, sorry. Will the time of use implement demand charges, or is it just going to fluctuate the cost of the kilowatt hours? And will time of use be rolled out to residential?
So time of use, yes, will primarily be residential because that's what causes our peak when everyone gets home. And I don't know exactly how it's going to be structured because we haven't got the design completed yet. But essentially, it breaks the day into blocks, time blocks, and it shows the time blocks that are the, like it's really inexpensive for us between midnight and 6. So for those of you night owls who want to, do your laundry at midnight, that'd be great. But for most of us who are sound asleep, then we've got to, we've just got to make it more expensive when it costs more, which is between 4 and 8 p.m. So energy usage during those hours is going to cost more. That's the gist of it. And then there was, yes. I knew I saw a hand.
Yes, I want to follow up relative to what Poppy's session yesterday morning about scaling up. And it seems like I've seen some examples of things of coordinated efforts on a block-by-block basis. And now that you present about the need for peak power management, it seems even more significant that I believe Denver did some of this work back in the R era, where we actually took whole blocks of areas and got all of the building owners to agree what would be done in terms of retrofitting that whole block for a variety of goals. And one of the things I think that happens on a real estate side, it invests the value of that property goes up for all owners of that property. So it's not just an energy conversation here. It's about modernizing our cities in a way that gets greatest value for the owners of the properties, and the occupants get the benefit of that, obviously. So is Seattle City Light looking at that scaling at the block level in terms of the conservation and now I'm thinking energy storage systems, thermal energy storage systems, because if you're doing whole block bases, you can do some shared systems there.
Yeah, I don't think we have, and I'm grinning because I'm like, oh, that could be good. That could be really good. So I love that idea. And we'll look into it. We'll do some research.
Add solar on
Yep. The comment was to add solar on roofs also, potentially block by block. So love that too. Thank you.
Last question.
Last question. Okay. I'm looking at the boss here to make sure we're, yeah.
The follow-up question about the not incentivizing gas. Can you give an exact, like an example of what it would be? Let's say a daycare has an old gas boiler. If they decide to switch to an electric boiler, that would not be incentivized, but like switching to air-to-water heat pump, so would they be incentive between the electric boiler and air-to-water heat pump because it's more efficient?
Yeah, I'm getting a yes from my team. I'm not exactly sure how it works. Do one of you, I don't know if you're either. I would say this, for anyone who's interested, call us. And we will work on the specifics with that situation. We will work to explain it the best.
Thank you.
You betcha. Love the question. Thank you all.
If you can grab your seats. I know it's hard not to chat with each other And I'm guilty of it too. Okay, so I want to give a warm welcome to Emily from the Washington State Department of Commerce, who will be our moderator for our next discussion.
Thanks, Carrie. This one or this one? This one. Off? Off. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Well, I just wanted to provide such a warm welcome to everybody. I know many of us traveled to be here today, so welcome. I'm so excited for the discussion. This is honestly one of my favorite conferences of the year. It just feels so good to come here and see so many familiar faces, new faces, and really have a very regionally focused conversation. So happy to be here. My name is Emily Salzberg, and I'm the Managing Director of the Buildings Unit that's situated within the State Energy Office within the Department of Commerce. Our team is responsible for overseeing a very broad range of codes, standards, and programs that are focused on the built environment. One of the standards that we're responsible for is the state's building performance standard. So I'm going to try really hard to stick in my role of moderator today, but if there are questions that come up about the state standard, I'm happy to field those. I want to point out a couple resources in the room today. We've got many talented folks from the Department of Commerce, so feel free to talk with them on a break. We've got folks from our technical team. So if you could stand up, we've got Luke Howard, Donnie Westfall, and Judy Darst here from our technical team. Judy's back there in the corner. We've got Derek Cockle and Brittany Wagner from our incentive program. We've got a table over there. And the one and only Annalyn Bergen, who is part of our compliance team. So feel free to grab them at a break if you have any questions. So we have an exceptional panel here lined up for the next hour or so. We've got Billy Ray Engelman from U.S. Department of Energy. We've got Nicole Bellinger from City of Seattle. We've got Sharon Jay from City of Denver, and Blake Shalide from the Oregon Department of Energy. They should be here shortly. I've never actually facilitated a panel that was like half in person, half remote, so we'll see how this goes. So building performance standards are really gaining traction in the industry. I'm sure you all have noticed the trajectory of discussion over the last even just 5 years, really gaining a lot of traction and momentum. Each presenter is going to provide some brief presentations. They're going to be reporting out on their progress to date and really providing some context from those local jurisdictions, from a statewide standard, and then we've got Billy Ray providing that federal perspective. So with that, I'm going to introduce Billy Ray, who I can see. Yeah, there we go. Nope. Billy Ray. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to let you do your intro. We're going to do brief presentations, about 5 to 7 minutes for each presenter, and then we'll have time for discussions and questions following. So Billy Ray, your turn.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Excellent. Just making sure that my virtual connection is good here today. I'm happy to be here. Sad I can't join you all in Seattle, but very happy to participate virtually. As Emily said, I'm Ray Engelman. I work for the Department of Energy's Building Technology Office. I will share my screen momentarily. But as I'm giving kind of the national and federal perspective of where we see building performance standards headed. Let's flip this a little bit. Are folks seeing my slides? There we go.
We can see it now.
Great. Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned, I work for the U.S. Department of Energy. I lead our work on building performance standards, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that today. So, as folks in the room probably know, building performance standards are a relatively recent policy mechanism that we see state and local jurisdictions across the country adopting and implementing in order to target increased performance and retrofit activity in existing buildings. And so kind of where we've been and how we've got to the world today. Before 2022, there was a few leading jurisdictions who had really pursued this policy mechanism for their local areas. And then following that, in 2022, President Biden did launch what's called the National BPS Coalition. That got started with 33 state and local governments who had publicly committed to passing a building performance standard. We've since seen that number of commitments grow to, I think we're hovering around 50 state and local jurisdictions at this point. And in addition, President Biden also launched what's known as the Federal Building Performance Standard. And so that is focused on federally owned and leased properties across the country. And so now we see quite far-reaching efforts to keep this policy mechanism moving in various locations across the country. As I mentioned, we're seeing around 50 and more jurisdictions every day across state and local areas, really considering whether this is a good fit for their greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, energy efficiency goals, and other goals for them sustain building stock. And we do see policies range across both emissions and energy reduction goals and in various sort of building sizes and types, as most folks in the room probably know. So at the federal level, we were seeing a lot of these policies kickstart on their own, and it was really exciting, but it was also kind of the Wild West of policy creation and implementation. So we really wanted to step in and support these jurisdictions and other market actors with technical assistance, resources, and funding opportunities. And so we launched, alongside our colleagues at the Environmental Protection Agency, what is called the Building Performance Standards Technical Assistance Network. And this TA is really aimed at those state and local jurisdictions who are the adopting and implementing bodies for these policies, to really support them through the more technical aspects of policymaking and design, and then also the program design and administrative structures and requirements that be needed for these pretty complex and data-heavy policies. For any jurisdictions that are in the room, please feel free to reach out at any point in time. We are happy to help and have a conversation about where you are in your journey. Just wanted to make that plug. But alongside that technical assistance, we also put out a ton of best practices, resources, guidance, and other sort of lessons learned kind of documentation for both jurisdictions and other market actors across the spectrum who are going to be tasked with the implementation and compliance requirements of these policies moving forward. So we definitely encourage folks, building owners and operators, third-party support, and others in this industry to check out our web resources and reach out with questions. And then alongside that, at the federal level, folks may be really familiar with some of these tools already, most notably probably EPA's Energy Star portfolio. But we do maintain a suite of tools and software in order to support the implementation of these policies. And that's both at a jurisdiction level, so the administration and sort of staffing aspects of the implementation of these policies, but that's also for building owners and operators who are faced with compliance. So things like portfolio manager or audit template can be really helpful in order to organize and standardize building energy and asset data to actually meet compliance with. And we really think about this as a whole suite of data collection and data management tools for multiple different actors to be able to successfully meet these requirements and change their buildings in a positive direction. And finally, just to wrap up, I don't want to take too much time, but I did want to highlight two different funding opportunities as an additional way that the Department of Energy is working to support this area of policymaking and implementation. The first is a funding pathway that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. We have actually awarded 27 projects already through this funding opportunity. Round 2 applications are closed at this point, and we are reviewing those, but there will be a round 3 to be announced soon. And jurisdictions of all sizes are encouraged to apply, and also third-party and other support organizations who are not jurisdictions but are working with jurisdictions are also very encouraged to apply to this opportunity. These are some of the areas of interest, and so it's energy codes and also things like building performance standards and other innovative approaches that we really want highlight and pursue with this funding opportunity. And then finally, the big one that a lot of folks have probably heard about at this point, but the Inflation Reduction Act codes provision. This is targeted at reaching zero energy codes and other innovative approaches such as building performance standards. This is open to state and local jurisdictions as well as territories across the US. And in particular, I just wanted to highlight the second round of applications is due by September 13th. And so we do encourage folks to submit applications for that if they are interested. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A section that I think will follow, but I will turn it back to Emily, and thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Billy Ray, and really appreciate all your work getting funding out to the states. Hopefully we'll get some questions about exciting news here in the state of Washington later on. I'm going to invite Sharon Jay from the city of Denver to present.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Sharon Jay, and I manage the team that is implementing the building performance standards for the city of Denver. But also in my past, I used to be a facility manager. So I used to be the person who was actually responsible for doing something like this in the buildings, which I think gives me a unique perspective on exactly what we're asking of these buildings when we create these performance standards. And then before moving to Denver 2.5 years ago, I worked on Washington, D.C.'s building performance standard, which was the first one in the country. So I'm going to give you just a quick snapshot of what we're doing in Denver, and then we'll pass it over to the next panelist. Okay, so in the city of Denver, commercial and multifamily buildings are 49% of our greenhouse gas emissions, which means if we don't address existing buildings in the city, then we are not going to get to net zero emissions by 2040, which is our goal. So we have broken it up into two sections. We're working on our building energy code so that all new buildings and homes become net zero energy by 2030, and all existing buildings and homes are net zero energy by 2040. So this is our Energize Denver ordinance. It was created at the end of 2021, which was before the Department of Energy stood up all of their programs. So I love that the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency are leaning into this and helping all of our other 50 cities who want to have these types of standards and give them technical assistance. We have been benchmarking since 2017. So what we did in 2021 was expanded that particular ordinance to add a performance standard that I'll go into in much more detail. And then it also instructs our buildings department to work on adding partial electrification of space and water heating equipment upon system replacement when cost effective. So that is some building code additions that we will be doing in the future to work on electrification of existing buildings. So on the performance section, we actually have two different types based on the size of your building. We have a one-time prescriptive upgrade requirement for smaller buildings, so that's between 5,000 and just under 25,000 square feet. The part that I'm going to focus on for the next couple of slides is our minimum energy efficiency requirements for buildings 25,000 square feet and larger. So what we did was we established energy use intensity targets. Our building performance standard is focused on energy efficiency because in our overall decarbonization strategy, we want to get our buildings as energy efficient as possible so that when everybody else is working on the grid and the system and making it more renewable, then we have less of a load on that grid, which was a lot of talked about in our previous speaker. So it is based on the annual submission of energy benchmarking, applied to all buildings 25,000 square feet and larger. If you see on the right, this is just a sample of all of the different property type EUI targets for 2030. We used all 70 plus property types in Energy Star Portfolio Manager and assigned them a target for 2030. Mixed-use buildings will have a blended target, so it all depends on how you benchmark. We use the trajectory model. For anybody in the audience that's either thinking about doing a building performance standard, I would look at the Institute for Market Transformation's model ordinance. Our model is very closely tied to their model ordinance and how they suggest standing up a building performance standard. So we use what they call the trajectory model, where you have the end goal is what it's going to be based on your property type. So the chart on the left shows you offices. It's a 48.3 is their goal, but your trajectory is based on where you were in the baseline year. So our baseline was 2019. We set some interim targets where we do check-ins that you have to be at least a third of the way there, and then you have to hit that 2030 target. So that slope of how intense your work is going to be is all based on where you were on your baseline. So this slide, I wanted to highlight one of the biggest issues that we have had in the city of Denver, and I honestly believe this is going to be the same across all cities that have these standards, is benchmarking. This slide highlights exactly why benchmarking is so important. So let's say you have a strip mall, and on the left, if you benchmark those 10 units as strip mall, which is what Energy Star Portfolio Manager kind of guides you to do, just put it in as a strip mall. Your 2030 target in our program is at 66.6. If that exact same 10 units is 20% restaurants, 60% grocery store, and 20% retail store, which are more higher intensity than an average strip mall, your 2030 target is a 146.2. If that exact same strip mall is 50% restaurants, 10% bar nightclub, 10% fast food, 30% retail store, it's a 149.9. So I wanted to illustrate how important benchmarking is, because it's been one of our biggest challenges over the last 2 years, is to just get people to spend more time on their benchmarking, make sure their square footage is correct, their energy use came in correctly from the utility company, they've benchmarked their high intensity spaces. That honestly has been our biggest challenge, to get everybody their correct target. So one of the other things that we're very proud of is that we have a lot of flexibility and compliance. I mean, at a basic level, all you have to do is hit your EUI target and turn in your annual benchmarking to prove it. So you don't have to do anything on this page. All you're doing is turning in benchmarking if you can figure out how to do it without needing some flexibility. But if you need flexibility, we have such things as a target adjustment. This is that process that if you didn't benchmark correctly in the past and you don't have the right target, we'll go through a target adjustment and then actually make sure that your target is correct. We also offer additional things for swimming pools or things like that. We're just doing some target adjustments for those. And then we have a bonus for electrification. So if the total energy use of your building, if at least 80% of it comes from electricity, we will give you a 10% bonus on your 2030 target. We also allow renewables to fill in gaps, or honestly do 100% of the actual compliance. So what we do is you have to turn in information about how much kilowatt hours was generated either on-site or off-site, or through a long-term subscription, and we will credit that for your EUI. We also have a timeline adjustment that has about 15 different reasons as to why we would adjust your timeline. Let's say you can't meet that 2024 target, which is the first check-in, and you are going to do a major renovation in 2028, then you're going to turn in some information, tell us exactly what you're going to do, on what timeline, and then we adjust your timeline. We also have some other specialized alternate compliance, which is for a lot smaller groups of buildings, like historical buildings, our manufacturer and industrial buildings. If you have vacancies, Denver is having a really big issue recovering from COVID in our downtown buildings. So we have a pretty high vacancy rate, and we don't want this particular policy to push people into financial distress. So we want to be able to work with them. So we have a lot of flexibility in our program. And so I'm going to pause here, turn it back over to Emily, and then we will go for Q&A later.
Great, thank you so much, Sharon. I was just reading about that trajectory model last night. That was my bedtime reading, so nice work on that. All right, so next up I'm going to invite Nicole Ballinger from City of Seattle.
All right, hello. Have you turned my mic on, hopefully, and folks can hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, this is really interesting doing this hybrid work here. If you can pull up my slides as well, that'd be great. Also really wonderful to see my colleagues, both in person and on screen as well. Really appreciate your presentations. So while the slides come up, so I'm Nicole Ballinger. I'm with the City of Seattle. They're working on it. Okay, I'm going to keep talking. So I am with the City of Seattle. I'm with our Office of Sustainability and Environment. I am the Building Emissions Performance Standard Program Manager. That is a massive mouthful. Just call me the BEPS Program Manager. And look, magically, slides have appeared. Okay, so I am going to talk about our new policy. Okay, so I think as many of you probably well know, Seattle became the 13th jurisdiction to pass the building performance standard last December. Hopefully that means we're lucky. This is a photo of the mayor signing it. It came about after 2 long years of really intense negotiation with stakeholders to get to a flexible and equitable policy. We had great support from our climate advocates, labor, and affordable housing in getting across the finish line. Of course, now we got to implement it. I'm going to step back a bit and say, why are we doing this? Like other cities and what you're hearing from DOE, buildings are really one of our largest sources of climate pollution here in our city of Seattle, about 37% of our emissions. And there has been great work going on across the city, doing lots of energy efficiency implementation. We have a 2030 district, but we're really not at a trajectory to meet our overall climate action plan goal, which is to get to net zero by 2050. So we had to do something about it. So BEPS really is one of the most effective actions that we're taking. The projections are that we could reduce emissions by about 325,000 metric tons from our existing large buildings. That equates to about a 27% decrease from a 2008 baseline. And that's across our whole building sector. That's not just the buildings that would have to comply. So it's a big reduction. If you like to think in terms of gas-powered cars, maybe we'll be doing that less and less, thinking about folks buying EVs. But that's about 72,000 vehicles off the road. Okay, so our BEPS policy covers existing buildings greater than 20,000 square feet within the city of Seattle. Non-residential and commercial, not to pinpoint these buildings in particular, but these are just some examples. I think this audience is very familiar with the diversity of different types of buildings within this market. Importantly, it does not cover industrial buildings like Nucor, does not cover buildings that are smaller than 20,000 square feet, and it does not cover single family, even if it happened to be bigger than 20,000 square feet. Okay, so what are we going to be requiring building owners to do? So BEPS is a kind of an every 5-year cycle type of thing. It's kind of similar to a lot of cities and states are implementing this. So we have our first compliance period starting 2027 to 2030. That's where we have these different, more reporting requirements. I think as many of you know, we've had energy benchmarking for quite a long time now, more than a decade. So we're going to be asking building owners to do a benchmarking verification with a third party. That's to make sure everybody's got kind of a clear sense of really what their true emissions are, that they're benchmarking correctly. I think Sharon nailed it really well, the challenges with accuracy and benchmarking in her presentation, so I won't say too much more about that, but that's really getting at those issues. Then also, we have these targets coming up, so really in our first compliance period, having folks do kind of a light GHG report, getting a look at what the current building's emissions are, current greenhouse gas intensity, setting their targets, and then talking, doing some investigation. We're not talking about a detailed action plan, but something about how are you going to achieve those targets? What pathways are you going to take to compliance? That's because we do have meeting those targets, starting meeting them with the largest buildings in 2031, and then achieving net zero emissions over time between 2042 and 2050. Oops. Oh yeah, on the right one here. Okay. So as you know, I'm up here with Emily. There is an energy use intensity performance standard at the state. And so we did work to try to align our timelines as much as possible. So if folks are now looking at meeting those energy use targets starting by 2026 for the largest buildings, the fact that we do now have our emissions target set means that they can take that into account as they're meeting the state standards. We do coordinate quite closely with the state, and we'll continue to do that throughout all our education and outreach. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but just note that multifamily buildings do have a little longer timeline to eventually get to net zero on that with the BEPS standards. Okay. So as I mentioned, we had 2 years of stakeholder engagement. Like Denver and other places, we do have a lot of compliance flexibility with different paths. We think that most folks will take what we call the standard target path, which is meeting these fixed targets. I'll show you a sample of that in a moment. But we do have flexibility built within that under Path B. There are potential extensions for certain circumstances. As we all know, challenges with vacancy going on in Seattle. We also have end use deductions. Certain building types and end uses are going to take longer to get to electric solutions. So things like cooking can be deducted for short periods of time. Path C is really the most complex path, but it offers the greatest flexibility for buildings that really have extreme circumstances. Say they're undergoing an unreinforced masonry upgrade, or it's a historic building. That's another option. So as I mentioned, most buildings under Path A, Path B are really going to be following the standard targets. So the targets for 2031 to 2035 are set, fixed within the ordinance. The ones that are later are provisional. They could be updated depending on future energy data that we get and energy benchmarking data or other things in the market. But so the key point is start to know what your targets are for 2031 to 2035 and start mapping out a path to meet those. This is just a little quick public service to just remind you that the requirements do phase in by building size. So the largest buildings going first, followed by the smaller buildings as well over time. And so every 5 years, you'll see those targets decline. Also, just a quick point out, in the 2028, kind of the middle of each cycle, we do have options for certain building types to comply as a portfolio or like a district campus type of scenario. So those, if you're using that pathway, you kind of get all your buildings in aggregate during that middle cycle timeframe. Okay, so where are we now with the policy development? So passed it in December. We are doing kind of ongoing stakeholder engagement, obviously building the team, been doing quite a bit of hiring, and we'll be continuing to do that. We have kicked off rulemaking in kind of a light way. We have a rulemaking work group going on now, giving us some early input to figure out and define some of the areas in the ordinance that are really going to need clarification in rules. I will say, unlike a lot of cities, our ordinance has quite a bit of specificity in it, but nonetheless, there still are things that we need some folks to weigh in on, so we're doing that now. Also plan to have some focus sessions starting later this fall. Once we have some draft language for the rule, we'll have public webinars coming up later this year and next year, and then do hope to publish the draft rule by Q2 of next year. If you want to follow that process, you can go to our website, find the link for the rulemaking page. We do publish summaries of kind of what's going on, what we've talked about in the work groups, and also we'll post, you can get on our mailing list if we're going to have a focus session to invite folks to that as well. Okay, wrapping up here. There's a lot of text on this slide. The key point is we're launching programs, we're securing funding. We have had great support for our energy benchmarking and tune-ups program. A number of our staff is actually here today representing those programs, so you can visit them later if you have questions. We'll do the same for BEPS, but enhance it even more. We also have a Clean Buildings Accelerator program that we launched already. We've had about 35 participants in that as well. Also pursuing funding. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the exciting news is we just got awarded through the IRA Codes Award, $17.2 million from US DOE. It is really going to have a superb enhancement on our ability to offer very deep BEPS support, particularly for building owners that would be we think at a disadvantage to meet BEPS. So super excited about that. Thank you to DOE for this. We literally just learned about this, so it's kind of just smashed on this slide in red. But look forward to engaging everyone more as we roll out the program and develop it more fully. So with that, I'll just leave the website information there and can take questions later, because I think we still have one more speaker.
One more, yeah. Thank you, Nicole. Congratulations on that award. That's so exciting. The state also was awarded $7.8 million to fund a fellowship program. So we're going to be working to support local capacity all around the state. So you may have seen Nicole and I started out the presentation with a big high five. We're pretty excited about that.
Oh, yeah. And if my mic's still on, if I can just add one quick thing I forgot to mention. So we have multiple local partners in this award. So Building Potential is one of our partners. So congrats to them. Seattle 2030 District as well. Congrats to them. And then the SEI Climate Corps. So a portion of our program will align actually very well with what the state is doing. So it's just another way, example of how we're partnering, have a big workforce development component as well to ours. So yeah.
Very exciting. All right, last but not least, our neighbor to the south, Blake Shalide from the Oregon Department of Energy.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I'm Blake Shalide, the manager of the Codes and Standards section at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about our building performance standards program that we are in the process of standing up kind of as we speak. So today's agenda, just we'll give a quick overview of Oregon's building performance standard, talk a little bit about like where it originated, the scope of the program, the timeline that we're in right now for both our rulemaking and then eventual compliance for buildings. And then we'll give an overview of our rulemaking process to date. The obligatory ODO mission vision slide, just kind of know that everything that we do, all of our programs are targeting our vision of a safe, equitable, and clean and sustainable energy future. And we think for the state of Oregon, and we think that our building performance standard really aligns well with a lot of what's embedded within our mission and what we do. Our building performance standard was part of a House bill in the 2023 session, House Bill 3409, really to address energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in existing buildings, which account for about 20% of our total statewide energy use. This program will require many large commercial buildings to enhance energy management practices and implement measures to improve their performance to help us meet our overall statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals. It's modeled after ASHRAE Standard 100. So if folks are familiar with the Washington program, the Oregon program is similar. Where we're looking to the most recent version of Standard 100, the 2024 version of that, and modeling our rules and modifying our rules based on that. It's administered by our agency at the Oregon Department of Energy, and it's modeled pretty closely after the Washington program. Our legislation mirrored that legislation pretty closely. So our scope of buildings, our program defines two buildings that are known as Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings. Tier 1 buildings are those that are larger than 35,000 square feet and generally fall into the sectors of commercial, non-residential buildings, hotels, and motels. And then the legislation also defines Tier 2 buildings that are mostly dependent on the sector, a little bit dependent on the building size, but it carves out specific building sectors that are multifamily, hospitals, schools, dormitories, and university buildings as Tier 2 buildings. And the primary difference between the requirements of a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 building are that the Tier 1 buildings will need to meet the full energy building performance standard, while the Tier 2 buildings will just need to benchmark their energy. And one of our tasks over the first cycle, in about 5 or 6 years after we gather the benchmarking information, is to recommend a full building performance standard for these Tier 2 buildings. So I think that was one of the kind of one of the lessons learned that went into our building performance standard, that there are some sectors that are maybe particularly challenging or sensitive for applying a full building performance standard when you're considering equity, affordability, and things like that for particularly the multifamily sector. So those were carved out, put into this tier 2 classification for benchmarking, and it gives us a little bit of time, a little bit of a runway to consider and potentially develop a full BPS for those sectors. And this slide is just a text narrative of that graphic that we showed on the last slide. So, what's a tier 1 building in Oregon? What's a tier 2 building? Compliance for our BPS will generally require either meeting a energy intensity target. Our intensity targets are based on site energy, and our targets will be based on the average energy use. So we're going through that process now to analyze existing data sets to set what is the right average energy use for buildings to set as the target. So that'll be developed with the draft form by the end of September, out for public comment, all working towards an end of the year timeline to complete our rulemaking. So, compliance is generally, meeting that energy use intensity target, kind of the simplest, most basic form of compliance, meeting that EUI target. We'll also have a similar investment criteria pathway that Washington has. There's conditional compliance pathways as well. And then we also have a number of exemptions that if a building falls under one of those exemptions, they would need to identify that they meet the exemption, apply for it, and then receive approval in order to be given that exemption criteria. We do have the ability to subject building owners to a penalty for not meeting the building performance standard, and that's up to the amount of $5,000 plus $1 per year per square foot of gross floor area. So our largest buildings compliance kicks in starting in 2028 with buildings 200,000 square feet or larger. 1 year later for buildings 90,000 square feet or larger, and then 1 year after that for 35,000 square feet or larger. So, we could be looking at potential compliance penalties once compliance timeline does kick in. Our overall timeline, so right now we're in the middle of a rulemaking process. We've been working with a rulemaking advisory committee for this year. We've been really thankful for that, all the perspectives and all the time that those committee members have given to help us work through all of our different sections of the rules. I think that's been a good process, and we've really learned a lot along the way. So we've got a directive from the statute to finish our rulemaking by the end of the year to stand up our building performance standard, and then by the middle of next year to notify building owners if they're a covered building. And then, as I mentioned before, our compliance starts, it kicks in for the largest buildings in 2028. Kind of following a phased-in period for smaller buildings. And then benchmarking for those tier 2 buildings kicks in July of 2028. And then we've got about a year after that to evaluate the data that comes in for benchmarking. And then another year after that to recommend a potential BPS for those tier 2 buildings. Our program is also similar to, I think, some of the other programs around the country, where it's a kind of a continuous improvement reevaluation process. So every 5 years, we'll be reevaluating the performance targets, potentially resetting what those targets are to ratchet them down over time to help us meet our long-term greenhouse gas reduction goals. And we'll be revising our rules on that same 5-year cycle. So kind of a continuous improvement, continuous process for us. And this slide just gives an overview of the stakeholder engagement or rulemaking advisory committee activity that we've had through the years. So we've had a series, about a half dozen or more, of rulemaking advisory committee meetings, just working through our draft rules. We've had a couple public meetings where we consolidate the RAC activity, roll that up to get some early public input on our work. And that's all leading toward our draft rules being filed by the end of September and then open for about a month and a half for review. And then we'll take the public comments that come back in the October, November timeframe and finish our rules to file them and be effective by the end of the year. So if you're interested in following and tracking along how our rulemaking process is going, there's a link on the website here. We've got all of our rulemaking meetings up there with recordings of the previous meetings if you wanted to go back and review some activity. And with that closes out my part of the presentation. And I think we're probably to the time now where we're potentially going to take some Q&A. So if there are any Oregon-specific questions, happy to answer those.
Great, thank you so much, Blake. So now is the time for our discussion portion of the presentation. I'm hoping there's lots of questions in the room, and if there's not, I have questions I'm dying to ask. But is there any questions in the room that we can take first? Whoa. Who's running around with Mike? Do I need to do that? I do not need to do that. I will stay seated. Here comes Stan. Okay.
The question for Sharon. So my understanding is that public schools are not included in the building performance standard. Is that correct for the Denver public schools?
So the Denver public schools, all of the public school or university institutions are considered state level. So Denver public schools doesn't have to do our performance standards, but they have to do Colorado State's performance standards. But we have an absolutely fantastic sustainability director at Denver Public Schools. So she's actually incorporated our information too, and she's just gonna try and meet both. So Denver Public Schools actually show up on our map, and they benchmark with us and all of that kind of stuff as part of the Denver community. But legally, they only have to do the state standards.
Okay, yeah, I know they're doing a good job, but when I talked to them, I thought they had said they were exempt from it, but I didn't know about the state one. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So Sharon, you brought up the space classification by like the strip mall. I was curious for the whole panel how we plan to verify space classifications.
I can start off on, we are doing in the years, so we have two different processes. We have the one where you have to do a target adjustment now to get the right target. If you want to change your benchmarking, you do have to have third-party data verification. And so you use the Energy Star checklist that is inside Portfolio Manager, and then you have a third party that have to have certain credentials, fill that information out and turn it in with the target adjustment application. And then in the years where we are evaluating performance, so like the 2027 and the 2030, that year's benchmarking also has to be third-party data verified. And so it's up to the data verifier as to whether or not they're physically going to be placed to verify the information, or if they'll just gather information from the building owner. We don't require an on-site visit, but the verifier has to be comfortable with what was sent to them to not do an on-site visit. A lot of them are. That's what we're doing in Denver.
Nicole, do you want to field that question with City of Seattle?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So we're still in our rulemaking process, so we'll be determining more specifics around exactly our requirements for benchmarking verification. But having had a benchmarking program for more than a decade now, we've actually done some verification required. Maybe some of you even in the room have received a notice after benchmarking that the data tripped some error flags. So we have a lot of experience to bring to bear on that. That we're looking at, and we'll be recommending some actions there for our rulemaking for public comment eventually. But we are also using the third-party process, so very similar to what Sharon mentioned as well. Requiring somebody who meets the qualified provider specifications. We'll also be rolling out, over time, real specific training about exactly what you need to look at. We can, of course, potentially still audit the data as it comes in. Whether we require site visits or not is to be determined. But generally following the same sort of third-party process. This is something that is actually generally recommended by EPA and Energy Star, and other cities are following this process as well for the data verification component.
Blake or Billy Ray, anything you want to add? We have lots of hands up in the room. Okay.
Oh, there's a question.
I'm going to go here and to you. Hi, this is a general question. For the greenhouse gas intensity targets, are any of these occupancy normalized? Because with a lot of building vacancy here in the city of Seattle, Denver, as Sharon mentioned, it seems like it's pretty easier to hit those targets.
Yeah, I can take that question. So we based ours on 2019 benchmarking data as the baseline. So obviously that was before the big pandemic, which kind of flipped the script on everything we know about building occupancy, I would say. So, we did, for certain building types, we did actually go back and look at some COVID data. Didn't see as much difference as you would think. What we hear from building owners, that many of them, they're under lease obligations to operate their building a certain way, whether anybody's in it or not. So actually not as big of a difference. We can, through a rulemaking process, potentially adopt normalization for hours of occupancy or sort of multifamily density. We've had some discussions on that, kind of to be determined what we'll do on that. But in general, we feel the targets as they are, based on the data and the stakeholder engagement we had, are really quite good for our first rounds. But yeah, it's a fair question to ask that.
Great, and then Sharon and Blake, your standard is based on energy use intensity. Was there any kind of normalization that you're either considering or have already adopted?
Right, ours is based on energy intensity. We're similarly basing our targets based on kind of pre-COVID level data. And our only benchmarking policy in the state is with the city of Portland, and they paused their benchmarking program for a couple of years during the pandemic, but just now restarted it. So they're starting to get some data in for the 2023 calendar year. But similarly, I think in some of the preliminary data that I've seen there too, there's not really as big of a drop in pre versus post pandemic data for some of their building usage. So, I think we still similarly feel comfortable with the targets that we're setting being representative for kind of the current situation that we're in, even with potentially some higher levels of vacancy in the, in the office and commercial building space. But we do have the ability also to potentially build in other normalization factors, but like that are related to vacancy, but we've not really started to explore that yet.
Yeah, we're doing more normalization on high intensity uses like swimming pools or things like that. I will say for occupancy or vacancy issues, it's more of a timeline issue and cash flow problem. It's not that the target isn't that good. It's more that the building owner doesn't have the cash flow to be able to do energy audits or, things like that, do their plans of what exactly they have to do. So we're actually working on adding additional flexibility so that I have a function in the program to be able to work with those buildings. So it's a problem in our downtown at this moment. So it's a bigger issue of how do I work with them, not necessarily what the target is.
Great, so we're fortunate to have Billy Ray with a federal perspective here today. So I'm gonna pose a question to Billy Ray. So Billy Ray, BPS and BEPS clearly changes the market dynamic from one of voluntary activity to actions and goals that are mandatory. I'm curious from your perspective at the federal level, how are you seeing markets in your communities across the nation change as a result of that mandatory requirement?
So we have for a long time tried to track the voluntary efforts across the country that we've been seeing, which, as folks know, are kind of across different program and policy efforts. And especially in the commercial sector, we notice that, you get anywhere from 2 to 4% retrofit rate activities over the past 30 years or so. And so we are encouraged by some of the regulatory activity because we know that buildings are so important to our goals. And so, yeah, we're seeing a lot of excitement for building performance standards, but also other sort of complementary policies that maybe take more of a mandatory or enforceable approach, both in commercial sectors, multifamily, and also smaller residential. And so, yeah, we're just keeping an eye out for that, and also hoping that our federal dollars can sort of spur activities that not only require certain mandates, but will actually get owners and operators to their goals to meet these requirements.
Great. Any other comments from panel members on that question? All right, back to the room.
So I wonder if there's any coordination between performance standards or potential financial incentives for natural gas and refrigerants.
Who wants to take that one?
I could start. I know, I would say for most of the building performance standard policies, they always include their local utility in on the conversation when they're actually building it out, so the utility knows what they might have to do. But for us, we have a regulated utility, which means we go through a Public Utilities Commission, which means it takes us a year to get any changes made sometimes of what, maybe bigger budgets or things like that. I know we have actually biweekly meetings with different folks with our utility to talk about what different types of rebates we can offer. Can we increase the dollars on this? When it comes to overall big budgets, it's Public Utility Commission type of activity, which takes a lot longer.
Any other thoughts from panel members?
I'll second that. At a national level, we are seeing a lot of work to incorporate utilities and jurisdictions sort of at the front end of policymaking and implementation efforts. And so that, all those parties can kind of align the incentive programs that are available and make sure that they're not in conflict with each other and their program goals. I will also say that there is, especially at this excitement around utilizing other financing and funding pathways, such as revolving loan funds and other sort of, things that have been around for a while but haven't necessarily applied directly to the performance and the goals that are being mandated for each jurisdiction. And so, locations are definitely being very creative with how they're thinking about funding and realizing that that's a really important piece of the puzzle for owners, regardless of what fuel end use roles that there are.
So, broadly at the city, we coordinate, of course, quite a bit with our own municipal utility with City Light, with our electric side of things. We do have great coordination and relationships with PSC, our gas provider. Obviously, some challenges with ours is an emissions-based policy. So you needing to work with folks to understand what the implications are of making changes in their buildings. But the utilities across the board really offer great incentives, especially for operational changes, like commissioning, retro-commissioning. So, and a number of buildings, I think, as we look at who may need to meet our future targets, don't have a long way to go necessarily. So taking advantage, especially of those types of incentives, whether it's from gas or electric utility, that would just help them really meet the targets with operational changes, with energy efficiency first. I think there's just some important opportunities to explore there and continue to explore.
Great.
Sounds like
Emily,
we're going to
have one last question from the audience.
Question. Yeah.
So my question is going to come from more of the implementation side of things. And I'm really very glad of the diversity of who's on the panel today, especially Denver. I think Denver provided me with some really important insights. And specifically the fact that you're from the facility management industry. And one of the things I know that I'm seeing so far what's happening in our state, a lot of things at the policy level, but not so many people who have experience on the implementation side of things. I started working in this arena back in 1984 with Title 24. Our 30-plus years of experience with the Building Energy Code shows us that the way in which these rollouts engage with the trade associations, with the design community, is essential to success. And what I saw with Denver was these optional of how you get compliance, showing a real responsiveness to marketplace conditions. So with that $17.2 million and with the new money that that state is getting, what are the big picture ideas that you have about how to get the implementation done? For me, the Trade Ally Network is one of those places I would look at. The Integrative Design Lab is another place I would look at. But there's existing entities out there that should be collaborating and engaged with. So I'd love to hear a little more from Seattle and
Sure.
the state.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. Yeah, I agree, absolutely. So it's a big grant. It's $17.2 million across 9 years. So we have kind of 3 tiers on that. I'll talk more specifically about our workforce work. So part of the funding is to hire someone who would be specifically a BEPS workforce advisor, and they would be coordinating with those trade entities. There's a number of different things. We have our integrated design lab at UW. We have the BTAC, Building Technologies Assessment Centers. Always forget that acronym. That recently got some federal funding to coordinate there. So agree expanding the linkages is one of the concepts that's included in that, and that includes a position to really make that effort. We have an existing workforce development person in green jobs broadly at our office, but needing it specifically for building emissions performance standards. So that's a component. Also, talk just briefly about a partnership with SEI Climate Corps, bringing in up to 3 Climate Corps folks per year. They have about a 1-year stint or so that is supporting both our program, but then growing the number, and they learn along the way. So then it's growing the pipeline for future workforce that can join many of the firms who I'm sure are represented in this room today as well. So yeah, it's about, I would say, at least a third or more is broadly in that sort of trade ally workforce development component. Thanks.
I'd love to add one thing to that. I think one of the things, because we've been implementing our program for almost 2 years now, and I think one of the bigger issues that we are seeing, at least in the last 6 months, as we're getting close to our first target, is that there is a decent amount of building owners that don't do any energy management at all whatsoever and don't even understand the concept, so that we are having to kind of dial back some of our coaching or add more coaching, but kind of bring it down a level to say, well, okay, maybe we made some assumptions that you just understood the tenets of basic energy management, but a lot of them don't. And so we're actually adding services this fall that are going to kind of take it back a level for folks that just don't even understand what energy use and intensity is, so that we can get them to a better place with what they're doing with their building.
Sorry, I'm going to actually invite up our next panel while we allow the audience to graciously thank the good information that this panel provided.
And I am going to just kick things off by welcoming Faith DeBolt from SBW to come on up and introduce yourself and your panel and get things going.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, everyone. We've had some last-minute shuffling around of our panel here, so I'm going to have to be a little bit spontaneous. So first up, we'll hear from Jessica Granderson from LBNL, and I'll let you all introduce yourselves, give your background as we go here. And then I don't think we had a whole lot of order to. Jessica's going to be presenting some, and the rest you can just describe who you are, what your role is, and then we'll go into discussion. So I think with that, I will just let Jessica get started, and I think she has slides. Do you want to be standing or sitting? Yeah, I gotta stand.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Faith. Thank you, Stan, for inviting me to join today's conversation. I'm Jessica Granderson, a senior scientist at Berkeley Lab. I'm also the director of our program that covers the buildings and industrial sector. Oh, let me see. Okay. This is a really exciting conversation for me to have with you all today and to be here and engaged. You heard some from Billy Ray about some of the federal context for the work that we're doing in BEPS. This is very personal for me. I've spent my career working at Berkeley Lab, with the exception of being extremely privileged to join the Biden-Harris climate team at the start of the administration. I was the director for building sector work writ large. And in that role, some of the major initiatives that I spent my time on were in fact related to the building performance standards. I led the work to establish the federal building performance standards with an interagency working group. That's effectively a zero emission performance standard with a prescriptive path for some allowances. And worked to stand up that state and local government national coalition. It's so gratifying to see where we've come, and I can give you a little read-in to where things were at that time. The emphasis really recognizing that we had access to a new policy lever that was going to open the door far beyond where we could get from our new construction codes and standards. Kind of unprecedented ability to get in and really realize not just the climate potential of our buildings, their economic potential and the human potential of making material improvements to our built infrastructure in a way that we never have. We, at the time, were able to harness momentum from jurisdictions representing over 25% of national floor area and population, and that has only grown since then. Part of that work involved also looking very closely at the funding mechanisms through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, then followed by the Inflation Reduction Act, and making sure that we had opportunities or tracks for BPS eligibility within the programs that we're looking at new construction or stretch codes. Hearty congratulations to the folks who have already spoken today and are very involved in and the beneficiaries of some of that work. And congratulations, Nicole, you and your team, Emily, you and your team, who I worked closely with in that time. Billy Ray also mentioned the technical support that's been mobilized at the Department of Energy and EPA. I want to also acknowledge the NGO community. There was a shout out to IMT and their model ordinance. Very instrumental work happening at that level as well. I'm extremely fortunate to be back to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory now, working on the same issues on the other side of the table. And I'll speak to some of that. Our conversation, and very well highlighted in the last session, has been, and our efforts in assistance have been rightfully very heavily geared towards supporting a data-grounded sound structuring of policy. So you heard folks with the targets that they're setting within their jurisdictions. Some of our support has been to provide analysis that will ground the consideration of different alternatives for those scenarios and compliance targets. We are in this for what comes out of the back end. Getting the policy right on paper is the first step, and now we need to direct our attention even more heavily to implementation. That was kind of the last question that rounded out the last session, and a tremendously appropriate segue into what we're talking about now, how we are supporting owners to meet those standards. And we're here talking about existing building commissioning as a first line of defense towards meeting those requirements. So we have new construction commissioning, we have existing building commissioning. I'm gonna probably just say shorthand commissioning, but I want you all to know that we are talking about existing buildings in this whole conversation, okay? That is the process of ensuring that our building systems are operating according to their design intent, according to evolving best practice. My team at Berkeley Lab, in collaboration with the Building Commissioning Association, conducted the largest ever empirical study on costs and benefits of this practice. And we found an average of 6% whole building savings. That's significant, with under 2-year paybacks. Now, depending on the delivery mode, those savings could reach 18%. We kind of see more commoditized packaged versions coming through a lot of our utility programs. We see more deeper comprehensive activities in the kind of owner-driven and owner-specified projects. So, you know, what this tells us, these savings levels are gonna be enough to clear the bar for many buildings that are covered by the BPS policies, particularly in those first compliance cycles. This is work that is focused on operational performance, getting things working the right way before we even get to more significant retrofits. So what I like to remind myself is that by design, like, why does quick payback operations only work get us there most of the time? Well, by design, you know, these are minimum allowable performance standards. We're not talking about stretch codes. We're not talking about high performance building codes, right? So our team at Berkeley Lab did an analysis with an example from 3 different BPS jurisdictions. We looked at the data, we looked at the particular structure of the policies they were considering, and we just said, well, hey, if commissioning saves us 6% on average nationally, as proven out over decades of work, how far would that get us in these actual jurisdictions? And you see in the bottom row of the figure on the slide that from 44% in one case all the way to 3/4 of the buildings in another case, they hit that 6% level, would clear the bar. So that's extremely encouraging. This is all operational, lower cost interventions. Certainly in some cases, we'll need capital investment. We will need to get in there and do some system replacements and retrofits. What I want to highlight is that the commissioning practice will protect the value of those investments as well, so that the savings accrue as we expect. If you see these plots on the bottom left, that yellow line, this is very notional, but that yellow line shows what happens when we do a quality install and then we just walk away. Performance degrades. The green line is the upward trajectory that we're after in our performance standards that is achievable when we have energy management practices and things like tune-ups and commissioning in the mix. Now, my team has also documented the costs and the benefits of a more continuous software-enabled monitoring-based commissioning approach. This won't be for everyone by any means, but that gets us even further, 9% whole building savings on average, again with those 2-year paybacks for the organizations that have capacity to do this. And it gives ongoing visibility and deeper savings, also cost effectively. Now, I don't want to suggest that this is simple, cinchy, easy done. Buildings are complicated. We know this. This is what keeps, I mean, I'll speak for myself, some of us involved for our whole careers. There are more nuanced ways that the commissioning process can mitigate financial risk. So let me unpack that for you. Performance, it's already come up in some of the comments and questions. Performance can be low for the wrong reasons. Okay, we could have low vacancy rates. We could be under-ventilating. We could be under-conditioning. And that compromises health and comfort. I'm showing an example here from our work with Seattle on quantifying the effectiveness of the tune-up programs. That was great. We saw in line with the kind of national work, the 4% average savings. But it's never quite that simple. In 1/3 of the cases, energy use went up after doing the commissioning. And so you've got to think that those are cases where we actually caught the underperforming systems and restored them to their design intent. So this means if we think about over a population of buildings, that the commissioning process is going to mitigate the financial risk of non-compliance with the performance standards. Similarly, it will mitigate the risks associated with reputational loss or potentially even legal action from not addressing those underperformance issues that can be present. I'd be remiss if I came to the Northwest and didn't talk about strategic energy management as a key component in some of this. So that, of course, brings in the organizational element, bringing those energy management practices into standard everyday business practices. We heard from Denver, you know, you'd be surprised. This is just wholly absent in many of our buildings. So, you know, I think of this, I had a choice to make here. Is it peanut butter and jelly or was it peanut butter and chocolate? I don't know. But commissioning and SEM go hand in hand and complement each other very well. We both are covered under the incentive programs here in the Northwest and in Washington State as well as nationally. So great, right? Everything's good so far. However, if we look to the work from recent publications from our colleagues at NEA, what we see from that is that even in a region that has a thriving efficiency ecosystem, we don't have sufficient uptake of commissioning in the marketplace. In the new construction case, fine, often mandated by code. We've got, you know, uptake levels of 70, 80%. Existing building commissioning, hovering at rates of adoption about 1%. So we really need to focus our attention there as we think about implementation and supporting owners to meet the standards. Can we drive a virtuous circle where that well-crafted policy is indeed driving effective implementation action and then on to another iteration? That's the business that we're really about now. So the Department of Energy is investing in an existing building commissioning catalyzer effort. This is to facilitate connections between owners and commissioning providers in BPS jurisdictions. We will promote region-specific resources to address owners' most common questions. We engage with building owners and operators continuously, and what we hear time and time again, to my dismay, having done this work for decades now, people don't know what commissioning is. They don't understand how it's different from auditing. They may need direction on what incentives are available, what local costs and benefits look like, who the reputable providers are. There's also questions around, we can say broad brushstrokes, when do you do commissioning? Oh, always? And it's like, no, seriously, when do you actually do the commissioning project? And so there's guidance to be delivered around that, as well as, although it surprises me as a researcher, the appetite for current and continuous case studies. You know, some of what I think of is, I'm like, oh great, another case study. Like, surprise, commissioning still saves cost effectively. But the value of that to those who are considering the investments and taking the action can't be overstated, and we hear that time and time again. So I'm very excited to have some of our first endeavors in this area right here in Seattle with the City Light team and Office of Sustainability and Environment. We're complementing that all the way on the other side of the country with activities with DC and with Montgomery County, Maryland. So with that, I will thank you and move on.
Thank you, Jessica. Is this live? Yes. Okay. Thanks so much, Jessica. And I will, first of all, I'm going to give Brendan that heads up that I'm going to have you go first. I want to just Briefly, I realized I didn't actually introduce myself. Faith DeBolt, a principal at SBW Consulting. And that previous panel, we had Emily from Commerce, Nicole from Seattle, and Blake from Oregon. And SBW has been supporting those three organizations in their development of their building performance standards. So I've been living in this world for the past 5 years, and it's that and SEM, they're my two favorite topics. So I was really happy to be asked to be a moderator here. So next I want to introduce Brendan from EEI and have you go ahead and say a few words.
Yeah, I thank you for having me here today. I think this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Building commissioning, I don't know, is something I didn't know about in high school or college, but as I kind of went through my career, I learned more and more about it. Building commissioning started in Seattle in around 1991, and then moved, I think, at the Fred Hutch, and then moved to the UW. So it's been around for a long time, and it's slowly been gaining more and more momentum, and to have these conversations today are fantastic. Where I started 30 years ago was at the University of Missouri in the energy management department. So we would get projects, we had a pig finder, we'd kind of go out and find out where the ugly buildings are, and we'd go in and, what do we need to do from a design standpoint? We installed a lot of metering, installed a lot of kind of just overall performance metrics. The result of that was kind of a higher fire line. So as we saved more energy, we would hire more people, and that happened over and over the years. And getting to a point where we had about 15 people in the department, and we really just kept saving more energy. As the campus grew, the energy actually went down over the years, and I think that was interesting. I think we saw that with the city of Seattle as well. It's been, the city has been growing in leaps and bounds, and the energy is fairly flat, which means we're doing something right on the conservation end of things. At the UW, they're kind of going through a similar process now as well. Like they're kind of looking at their campus EUI and what does that campus EUI, how does that compare nationally? And they're kind of high, so they need to do some things to reduce that. And we're seeing that with building owners as well. Like a lot of, if they have large portfolios, they're looking at how can we, manage our portfolio and bring that down. Not all building owners are built the same. We've seen, I think working across the state and across the country, we see some building owners that are very much on board for energy conservation. They pay attention to EUIs. They understand how these things work. But there's a lot that don't, and they don't believe in it. And they think that all these building performance standards, there'll be a lawsuit somewhere and it'll all kind of go away. So we'll be okay. And they kind of put their head in the sand and hope we don't have to do anything. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think everybody in this room is here for a reason. We all do believe that, this is the way forward. So there's some, there's a lot of education going on there to get people across that threshold. Through the years of doing commissioning, existing building commissioning, kind of what I've learned is, existing building commissioning 15 years ago was kind of doing studies and saying, okay, here's a list of things we can do. There's a bunch of broken things that need to be fixed. The building operators would say, yep, we know about it, but where's the funding for this stuff? How do we get that funding to fix these things? Well, it's not funded right now. So that report went on the shelf. We wrote a lot of those reports that have gone over on the shelf over the years. So I think where we've changed in that conversation in the last 10 years is start that conversation with, what is the investment we need to make with these programs? We're going to do a study, that we're going to benchmark it. We know the building is high on energy use, maybe it's low. But, what's the investment we can make to reduce that energy use? That conversation needs to happen kind of day one. Not only, we're going to do the study and understand where we're at, but how much are we willing to invest? And we see that a lot in the private sector now with, vacancy rates being high in office buildings. There's not the cash flow to put that in. So we have to get creative in how do we generate those cash flows and how do we, show payback and, say, hey, there's a lot of utility incentives, there's a lot of commerce grant incentives, there's a lot of incentives out there to get money flowing. But I think that's probably the biggest lesson learned I've had is, how do we get that conversation started. How are we going to make investments in buildings from day one? And what are the things that we're doing with these investments? That's kind of the next step. Is okay. We've got people on board. We're seeing these things happen. What are the investments we're making? Some of it's in controls. Some of it's in just operational. From a performance standpoint, 80% of the energy efficiency that we see that we implement, it's pretty easy to do. Low cost, no cost stuff is pretty simple. As we do various analytics and that sort of things, we can find, just shutting things off. It's the same things we've been doing for 30 years, but there's a lot of owners who don't realize, even what energy efficiency is or why that's important. But, once we go into buildings, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of operators go through and they make decisions on, well, one time, 5 years ago, we had a situation where, it was really cold out that day, so we had to run our boilers 24/7, and they never shut those off since then. So there's just a lot of little operational things that we can do, we can implement that have huge impacts on energy savings. If you look at just the time of day, operation hours, that sort of thing, by reducing, most buildings operate 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. If we can reduce that by a couple hours here and there, that's a huge energy impact. You can have 10, 15% energy impact just by reducing energy or hours of operations. I know at Seattle Schools, they did that several years ago, and they, put a very hard line in the sand on what hours they would operate, and it was a big impact to their energy. They saved millions of dollars just by doing that. Once you generate that millions of dollars, you can implement a lot of new and interesting things from there. Yeah, I think, job one is to understand what your baseline is. And a lot of these energy performance standards are going through. It's a great program. If you follow the steps, it will identify what needs to be done and how do you get there. So I think there's a lot we can do with building commissioning. There's a lot of growth in that field right now. Right now, what we're struggling with is how do we find the people to do all that work? So it's a very detailed, you have to know a lot about everything to implement commissioning in a good way. And how do we train these people? And that's been really the struggle. What we're seeing, we're looking at hiring, about 40 commissioning agents by about 6 months from now. And it's hard to do. Like, where do you find those people? How do you train those people? And how do you get them to be able to go into a building, identify quickly what the measures are that we need to implement, and then confidently go to management and leadership and convince them that this is the right path forward? I think that's a big hurdle we're all facing, and we're all looking for that same talent in the industry, and that's a big challenge that we have right now. I think the commissioning industry started, 30 years ago, let's say, and it's growing and growing. And a lot of those people that started 30 years ago, that started those business, are retiring now, and they're aging out of the process, but we haven't really put new people back in. We haven't trained those young engineers to do that kind of work. So that's what we're struggling with now, is how do we bring in, and where do we find these people? Are they in the trades? Are they the startup guys? There's a lot of new construction going on at the same time. So those resources are being pulled. So it's a very limited pool of the talent that we need to bring into this industry. But I think there are huge gains that we can make with building commissioning by doing simple things. I think what Jessica indicated, and we've seen over and over, to get 6 to 15% energy savings by just going into the building and thinking about how does this thing work? Can we turn it off for longer hours a day? It's just simple things that can be done. But there's a lot of buildings out there, and you look at the number of buildings that these BEPS programs are going to affect. You're going down to 20,000 square feet. That's thousands and thousands of buildings that somebody needs to go into and identify, measure that we can implement. There's a lot of opportunity in the future, but there's a lot of pull on a lot of the same resources that are interested in that. So I think, the things that we're going through right now, the city of Seattle is trying to engage with STEM programs, get people interested in this work. So I think it's hugely important on how we go forward, and it's growing at a very significant rate. So I think, once we get all these things together, we're going to do fantastic things. That's me.
Thanks so much, Brendan. Let's see, I think next I will have Pat from Everett Community College go next. Yep.
Hi, I'm Pat. I'm just some guy that Stan found down on the waterfront, and I brought me up here with a net, and here I am. So, no, actually, I started out, believe it or not, as a work-study student for the college. My background was in manufacturing and solar design, and I went back to school because I couldn't get a job doing solar design because I couldn't do CAD. So I went back to school and started working as a work-study student in facilities, and then I never left, and it's too late for them now. So I started out HVAC, pushing a tool cart, and then I moved up into management and started pushing papers around my desk instead. And so that's kind of where I got started in the field. I've been at the college for about 12 years now, and, well, a little over that, but so I kind of have the boots on the ground perspective of a lot of these things. And I'll reiterate a lot of what was just mentioned as far as kind of the challenges that we face. For one thing, I must say that Commerce and Emily and her crew has been great to work with for us because we're a state-funded agency. We only get funding from what we're allocated by the state and our tuition. So that's pretty much it. We're not a research institution like UW or someplace. We don't get any federal dollars per se. So we're working on a shoestring budget a lot of the time. And so Emily's probably, like sick of hearing from me because I'm always that guy at the conferences with his hat in his hand saying, show me the money, And, but they've been very great to work with. And so one of the things for us on a nuts and bolts side of things is we have a real wide range of buildings, everything from 1950s old school stuff with pneumatic controls where there's no visibility, no computer controls, all the way up to modern buildings that just came online last year. So being able to integrate any kind of a control system into our campus is very difficult. And so we're facing a lot of the challenges that the folks in the private sector are also facing. Benchmarking, for one, has been difficult because we've been doing it since about 2008 through Portfolio Manager, but previous people who had been in that system, things weren't quite set up correctly. And so one of our issues has been sub-metering. For example, we have several buildings that share common utility feeds, like in particular electricity. And so when you go to do your benchmarking and stuff, you can benchmark, as a campus per se in those instances. But if you look at that building in itself, it's getting the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. When you look at it, its UI is horrible because it's actually feeding electricity to 10 other buildings, right? So again, you can get down to the campus level compliance, but I have the problem with that in the sense that once you have the buildings and say you are at a campus level, and we're doing pretty good, by the way, on that, but if you go to make changes or you try to justify large capital expenses to do improvements for HVAC or systems like that, if you can't show what that actual building is doing, it's really difficult to be able to prove and say, okay, yeah, we made this change, and look, our UI for the whole campus is down, but can we really prove that it was that? And that's kind of a challenge, especially when you're, again, trying to fund big projects and getting taxpayer dollars, because we pay taxes like all you guys too, and we want to be good stewards of taxpayer money. So getting these investments, you have to justify it. And if you can't really show what your building performance is doing, it's difficult. So one of my big things I've been harping on is sub-metering. And again, the Commerce has come through, and we're in the process of getting a bunch of that work done on our Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings. But it's a challenge, you know, being able to just keep track of everything. For example, and another thing across the state board system, there's 34 technical and community colleges in our system. And as far as I know, I'm the only resource conservation manager in all of them. I used to be facilities manager, and just last year I transitioned into this new role where I'm now resource conservation and sustainability coordinator. But most of the colleges don't have that. Most of them, it just gets dumped on the facilities manager. And here you've got this facilities person who's trying to keep the building running, right? They're trying to take care of the broken toilet calls, you know, and the HVAC system complaints and things like that, and take care of building energy management and compliance with clean buildings performance and all these kinds of things. So it's a real challenge on the public sector side that we deal with. You know, some of the things that we do are just best practices. For example, are to reduce greenhouse gases. Our main greenhouse gas is, of course, natural gas-fired boilers. We have one central steam plant that we've slowly been taking buildings off of and transitioning them from the central steam to on-site boilers, hydronic loop type boilers. And that's been helpful because it reduces the overall load, because the old system was, again, 1958, and the boilers are ancient, inefficient, and all this. But some of the strategies we do, for instance, is when we don't have a heating load in the summer, we just shut down everything on all our natural gas boilers. The only thing we keep on is anything that powers like domestic hot water. If we have a natural gas hot water system in that building, that has to stay on, obviously. But other than that, we shut down everything we don't really need, not only for maintenance, but also just to reduce, you know, emissions. And, you know, building scheduling, that's another big one. Trying to get, you know, as a community college, one of our mandates is, you know, having classes for people when they can take classes. And a lot of times that means night school. So how do you balance the needs of students who are there till 11 o'clock at night over, you know, getting your buildings to operate and not keeping a 65,000 square foot building open for one class at night. So trying to balance class loads and getting them consolidated into one or two smaller buildings, rather than have spread out across the campus. And, you know, I just wrote our energy management plan for the campus, because up until just recently we didn't really have one per se. And so that's in the process of going through the approval, because anybody that knows anything about the state or like community colleges, everything's ruled by committee, right? You got to go through this committee, and then you got to get that approval, and you got to get that. So it's a process. But we're in the process of getting that going, and once we get a real plan of action approved by the community as a whole, we can start making more progress along those lines of, okay, you know, sorry, instructor, you can't have your classroom in the same building as your office. We got to consolidate them into this building, and we can shut all those down to the night setbacks. And so there's strategies that you can do, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, to try and mitigate some of these problems. But, you know, overall, it is a big challenge for us. You know, DDC controls, it's another one. Like I said, we've got systems, HVAC systems, that are still pneumatic, and there's no visibility. And it's 1958 pneumatics that we don't know if it's working or not. And that's where the commissioning aspect comes in. But again, on the public sector side, how do you pay for commissioning? You know, for example, we have pretty substantial, over the last few years, had substantial energy savings, because you can just look at our budget. We spend a lot less on utilities. Well, unfortunately, facilities doesn't get to keep that money. It goes right back to the general fund, and then they spend it somewhere else. So I'm trying to work with the administration and other folks to say, okay, look, if we can prove we saved this amount of money, can we earmark that money for future capital investments on energy efficiency improvements and things along those lines? But again, it's a fight. You know, everybody wants their piece of the pie, and you know, our excuse me, our mandate, is the whole reason we have jobs is to educate students, right? To have a healthy, safe place for students to go and learn. And so that's our primary goal. And we need to work really hard to meet these guidelines. And I very much approve of the greenhouse gas reductions and the Clean Buildings Act and all that. It's just on our side, the capital investments is usually the biggest challenge. And I know a lot of people in this room, even in the private sector, are facing those same challenges. And so I would say that from my end, go after the low-hanging fruit, try and do the building efficiencies as much as you can, do commissioning, building commissionings, and you can get huge gains just by building schedules. If you have a building with a whole bunch of different types of tenants, try and get them all on the same page, and especially like high rises, try and, if certain floors, if you can have the systems shut those certain floors down if there's nobody there during the day, rather than run your entire system for the whole building 24/7. So that's kind of our challenges and where we're at this point.
Thanks so much, Pat. And yeah, we literally did bring in Pat last night, I think was as a replacement. Here, yeah, thank you, Pat. And now we have Ian Brown from Seattle Public Schools, and he was literally just before the panel. I asked him to come up. We had someone else from Seattle Public Schools on the panel who I think fell ill and wasn't able to make it. So thank you, Ian, for stepping in the last second.
Yeah, so hi, Ian Brown, Seattle Public Schools. Richard Best was, who's Director of Capital and Facilities, was supposed to speak. So I'm here in his stead. Seattle Public Schools has about 105 buildings, about 10 million square feet or so. We've been benchmarking, and my role, I'm one of two resource conservation specialists. We used to be called managers, but we don't actually manage anything anymore, so now we're specialists. But I'm the data collector, and I put stuff together to distribute internally and externally to say, hey, this is where we are with our buildings. So that's my role. But in sticking with the theme here, going to talk about retro commissioning real brief. I actually have a slide deck about this. I've presented a couple times for I think started with the Center for Green Schools. But in 2016, the city of Seattle implemented the building tune-up ordinance, and that was the precursor to, Nicole mentioned it in her slide, it's being sunsetted in 2026 as BEPS takes over. But when that happened, we talked with the city of Seattle that we wanted to do this internally. So we hired 4 retro commissioners to go through our buildings. And there were a lot of advantages to that. One is continuity. The program is cyclical. Every 4 years, you're going to go back into the same building. They know the buildings now. It's also a little cheaper to hire internally. That's instead of a 2-step process, it's a 1-step process. Instead of hiring an outside retro commissioner to point out the things that need to be corrected. This was all prescriptive path, basically. There was no investment criteria for this. It was simply saying, get your buildings working as best they can with the systems that you have. So, and when I came on, I really wanted to know how it was doing, because there were some studies that were showing, there would be a net savings on your buildings if you did this, even with the cost of the building tune-up that you did in a prescriptive path. So I did a comparison of buildings before and after they were tuned up. And we've been benchmarking for years at Seattle Public Schools with EPA's portfolio manager. So I used all the weather normalized EUIs out of portfolio manager. That's also my job, is to push all of our utility data into Portfolio Manager and maintain that and correct square footage and everything. So in the aggregate, before and after, we reduced our building EUIs by 2.3 kBTU per square foot per year. Some buildings went up, some buildings went down. You know, Jessica pointed out that, you know, maybe a building's underperforming for some reasons. Well, you know, this is anecdotally, but when I talked to our retro commissioning team, a lot of the things they were fixing were ventilation issues. So you bump up the ventilation, yeah, you may be using more energy, but you're also providing better indoor air quality for our students and faculty. So it's still a win, you know. You need to make the buildings work as best as they can. If the ventilation isn't working, you need to fix it. But again, in the aggregate, our EUIs went down 2.3%, or no, 2.3 points. So what else did I want to mention about that? Our team of 4, they have deep backgrounds in building automation systems. So they went, this was already mentioned in the panel, they went for the scheduling first, right? That's what you got to do. Make sure your circulation pumps aren't running 24/7. Make sure exhaust fans aren't running 24/7. So they go into the scheduling, fix all that. Also, they would go in, the building tune-up ordinance required your monitoring only 12% of your HVAC components. They did 100% on all of our buildings. And because they had the wherewithal, they would repair things on the fly. They estimated about 80% of things that they found they could fix, whether it was scheduling or actual physical things, replacing fan belts, you know, they can deal with heat pumps. And what they couldn't do, because they're in the system, they could put in the work orders within our school system to have the other problems dealt with. So it was, I think, a really efficient way of doing it. And even though the building tune-up ordinance is sunsetting in 2026, our director of facilities has decided he wants to keep on our retro commissioning team. You know, retro commissioning, recommissioning, commissioning. You know, retro commissioning is you go into a building that hasn't been touched. Well, they've done that. Now they're touching it again. So now they're recommissioning, right? So it's a bit interchangeable. But in any event, our facilities director wants to keep them, even after the building tune-up ordinance has been sunsetted, he wants to keep them on the job because, as I was talking with Luke Howard earlier, we finally feel like we're getting, instead of reactive maintenance, we're getting into preventative maintenance because of the work that they're doing on the buildings. So he's going to have them keep doing the job. I would like to segue them into helping with, for the building performance standards, helping to format the energy management plans and the operation and maintenance plans that we need to submit for the state clean building performance standard. It remains to be seen about that. We're still dealing with this internally, and we have hired we've hired Hargis engineers to, I'm going to segue a little bit about funding issues, because this is always an issue. People say it's an unfunded mandate. Well, yeah, we need to do it. So, and I feel like Seattle public school systems statewide, their funding mechanisms are a little different. So, you know, we have to go out for levies that are in a 3-year cycle. So we have to prepare far in advance for what our ask is going to be for Seattle voters to say, we need this money for compliance, for getting into the 2 different building performance standards that we have. And we have to really plan ahead in that ask and juggle which buildings need to comply first, so we know where to apply the money first. It's fairly complex with the 2 building performance standards, but we're getting there. And you know, you just have to keep pushing forward. So anyway, our retro commissioning team, great job. They're going to stay on, even though building tune-up ordinance is going away. And the results are there in the aggregate. Again, as I said, it's a worthwhile program. Retro commissioning, recommissioning, however you call it. Anyway, that's what I got.
Thanks so much, Ian. Stan, I want to do a time check.
Keep going. Standing in between these people at lunch.
All right. So I have a few questions here, but I want to open it up for the audience if you have any burning questions to start with you. And I see Debbie here. Wait, I think they want you to speak into a mic.
Thank you. So Brendan, you mentioned how much you're needing to scale up your own workforce to address this, and it's true that across Washington, it's not just thousands of buildings, but once you get down to 20,000 square feet, it's like hundreds of thousands of buildings that are going to need to meet these building performance standards over time. Like first, the benchmarking, but then in the future, they'll need to meet. So I'm really curious, there just aren't going to be enough people to do this. So I wonder if any of the panelists have ideas on how this can scale over time. What are going to be ways to make it accessible, especially to the less sophisticated building owners and operators, and simple enough for them to do among the many other responsibilities that they have?
Yeah, it's a really great question. If you have any answers, let me know. Because I'm sure I'm not the only one dealing with this right now. I mean, I think Nicole had mentioned that there's some workforce programs, trying to get people trained up, and where do we pull these people from? And there's, I think what we've learned is there's different levels, and I love what the Seattle Schools has done, like bringing that internal. Honestly, that's the best way you can, you're hiring, employees. They learn the buildings, they learn what's going on, and they can have real impacts to it real time. As a consultant, we come in and we raise our hand and say, hey, we have these recommendations, but then it goes to the public program of, well, we need to get approval for this, and that takes a while, so it's not an immediate change. So bringing it internally, and that's where I started at the University of Missouri. That's what we did 30 years ago. We had we hired contractors to install parts and pieces, and then we programmed them and maintained the control system internally. You have, as an owner, you get the most control of your systems that way. If you can afford to do that, it's a fantastic way to go. There's also, there's a lot of, you talk to Mac Miller, McKinstry, Holiday Parks, they have service programs that can do a lot of this as well. And a lot of the, you get into the smaller buildings, the rooftop equipment, it's simpler systems, and it may move more to service side of the world.
For what was coming to my mind, Debbie, with your question, so as we focus on that pipeline and making sure that it is filled and accessible, we are also, things like the building performance standards are going to require us to really establish a through line between trades and those who are touching our buildings now into the performance on the out end, right? And that hasn't been happening. We've had a strong disconnect there. You've heard that in many different flavors throughout the morning. Tremendous opportunity there. We're hearing that already from some corners of the skilled trades industry. Seeing real opportunity for hey, wait a minute, is this not a disaster? We're touching buildings all the time. Call us up. We can serve and pitch in. So there's great opportunity there. The other thing I want to say, I don't know, I'm going to get in trouble with my commissioning friends. In this extremely niche industry, right, 1% so far, we need to change that. We in many enterprises kind of have been holding out kind of a purist take on things, that when we get in there and do the work, we're going to do comprehensive, thorough, gold-plated projects to the full extent that we can. We're going to do it the right way. And we should do that. We should deliver quality. But we got to think that in spite of some of the market spoiling that has happened, I won't deny that, in certain parts of the country, there has to be opportunity for kind of a willingness to go a little bit lighter to bring people along on these compliance trajectories, right? To have a willingness to work with the customer to clear the bar and then build on that success for the next cycle. I think we could do a lot more, and that doesn't, obviate the need or the value of those, more traditional comprehensive approaches. But if we have to touch all buildings mostly, we're gonna have to open up new mechanisms. I think the other thing that we are totally under leveraging, particularly given the state of the world today and our investments in things like smart meters, is that we have to be using technology more aggressively as a bridge. We need to be gaining visibility into performance. And as we've already heard, we know most of the time this is schedules, this is set points, this is getting resets working correctly. And when I say set points, that's economizers, that's zone temperatures, that's a very kind of focusing on the top 10 is going to get us a long way. Training the folks already servicing the buildings in recognizing the top 10 and their value add in satisfying it is gonna take us a long way. So those are some additional thoughts on kind of bridging that chasm that we have today with the opportunity of those policy drivers that are forcing us to get more serious real quickly.
Thanks, Jessica. I think Ian has a...
Yeah, just I'm starting earlier. I'm going out to schools that any teacher, CTE teachers who invite us, we go out and we talk about building science to classrooms. Often they're doing some kind of an emissions program or something, or module in their class, and I go out and I give them a tour of the facilities, take them into the boiler room where no one ever gets to go, show them this is how your building's being heated, and try to get them interested in building sciences, saying, it's a growing industry. So starting young.
That's great, Ian. I was hoping that you would have something like that to chime in, and that is, filling that pipeline and getting away from that stigma of a 2-year, post-high school program, that everything has to be 4-year degree. So we need trades. So I think, do we have time for one more question?
10 more minutes.
Oh, okay. I see a hand here.
Yeah. No, I like Poppy better, so.
Uh-oh.
Well, better be good. I might have to defer or something like that. Anyway, this is just a quick question, but it might not be a quick answer. It might be the opposite. But at the plenary yesterday, we were talking about the need for industrial scale implementation. And so a lot of what we're talking about right now is more about how do we build up the workforce and our trades and trade schools. And I definitely think that we need all that. But I don't think that is going to be enough at all. We just don't have the time to actually build up quickly enough, and we don't have the kind of infrastructure for that. And so I just wanted to use this example of the Bonneville Dam. So we built that in 5 years. And that was in the 30s, and it was about 70% funded by the federal government. And we didn't build up our trades to then be able to have all the people to build the dam. We basically organized a massive implementation team to build that dam in that 5 years, and it was through an economic development lens. It was precisely to develop the economies of the Pacific Northwest. It wasn't because we already had the demand. We were trying to create the demand. And so I do have a question here, because I think it connects to what some of the other people in the audience were asking about neighborhood scale implementation, and we could have there's a really strong connection between the neighborhood scale implementation and the industrial scale workforce development. And so I was just wondering if there's anything happening on the national level or the state level to maybe build teams up to be able to go out and kind of do this targeted implementation if we combined it with the neighborhood scale approach. Because those people might be coming in from other states. They might even be coming in from other countries. We have a lot of limitations on that. They could be more temporary. but we get a lot of influx of money locally when those people are here, so we're not totally losing it. So to, you know, outside entities, but I'm just wondering, is that being discussed at the national and state level?
Sounds like we start with Jessica on that. I don't know. Out of this panel.
Oh, well, I guess I don't have a ready baked answer there, but what I read into some of your comments and your question is like, okay, are we getting more creative about how we go about doing this work, right? So, you know, you're making me think some of like what could a seasoned, experienced engineer do with a team of motivated, you know, kind of bright students or undergraduates. I'm thinking a little bit of, you know, we have had long-running success nationally with things like, you know, industrial assessment centers, which have been geared around, you know, ongoing education. But I'm thinking of some of those models, like you have kind of a, how do you harness the existing knowledge and skills base and pair that with, you know, the armies of the willing to get out there and do the work? I've thought about this before in terms of like, gosh, for smaller buildings, what could we get if we just, they're never, you know, the thermostats are like never programmed. So it's like, I don't know, what if you just like sent 50 high school kids out to just like program every single thermostat and get your scheduling handled? Like, you'd probably get a lot of savings. They would be busy all summer. It'd be great. You could pay them $10 an hour or whatever. 15, oh, Washington State, sorry. How much do we, $20 an hour?
Thanks, Jessica. Anybody have?
Well, I would love to see something like that, but I haven't seen anything like that, at least not at my level. You know, occasionally we get work study students who are interested, or people who we can bring into facilities or other projects around campus. I'm also a sustainability person, so I'm looking at trying to get folks to work doing some ideas we have around on our grounds team and things like that. But, you know, one of the big problems is interest. People, you know, I hate to say it, I don't want to slam any particular person or generation or anything, but a lot of folks nowadays want to make their money being YouTubers or being behind a computer. They don't want to be digging a hole or, you know, working in a boiler room. That's just what I found, and that's an anecdotal, you know, example. The other side is the liability issues. You know, when you get a bunch of untrained people and you can't just let them loose in a steam tunnel or a boiler room, you got to have somebody with them. And right now, for almost 1 million square feet, we have 3 engineers who walks with these untrained people. But I understand your point, and I agree with you. Those are great ideas, but it's the implementation and, you know, trying to get the actual projects done and get things working. It's a real challenge without some type of investment. I'm the annoying money guy, but that's what it comes down to. These kinds of programs require funding of some way in different facets of it. And if you just don't have the investment, it doesn't happen. That's just the reality of it, in my opinion.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, Jessica, I'm going to bring what you said into a local level here. So PSE has a program where they will pay 75% of the wages of an intern that you can hire. You pay the 25%. I think it's for a 10-month stint. I've met 3 people who have done this for school districts where they have, on their own, gotten the school districts up to their benchmarking requirements for the state Clean Building Performance Standard. So there are resources out there. I thought that was a great program. It was a great introduction to all 3 of those folks that I met that have now segued into other jobs, whether it's with a school district or McKinstry or whatever. That was their entry point. So.
That's the Climate Core program. Is that the Climate Fellows?
Yeah, Climate Fellows, yeah.
Which it sounds like the state and city of Seattle have just gotten, that's what their grants are funding. So One more?
One more. Here's my designated last questioner.
Okay.
I'll follow up on Poppy. So I brought this up yesterday. The Building Decarbonization Coalition put out a white paper in January of this year, and they are working in California and New York directly on this neighborhood scale issue. So Berkeley Labs, I hope you'll go back and find those people and connect up with them. This seems like this is a ripe, and I believe that it's state and federal legislatures who need to be brought into this, because this is a workforce, as you talked about relative to the 1930s. This is about how we scale up our economy around decarbonization.
Don't you agree? I think.
Yes.
It was the embodied question there. Carrie, if you wouldn't mind closing out the session and helping us thank this panel.
Yes, I don't mind at all. I will take a microphone. I'm loud, though. Can you all join me in applauding our fantastic discussion here? Thank you. Super interesting. I love just diving into the kind of what does this mean in reality side of the conversation. So the last 3 days, does today count? I don't know, I have to ask my kids. Have been just a really incredibly inspiring set of conversations. It's always such an awesome gathering to come together virtually and then get to meet up with some people in person on this third day. Thank you to all the staff behind the scenes, and especially Stan and Britton for really just master of ceremonies on all of the details that most of you probably didn't even realize the level of anxiety. And thank you, of course, again to our sponsors and to our speakers today and over the last 3 days, all our panelists, our moderators. Thank you all. It's our collective brains that are gonna solve all the problems of the world, right? So we are going to be adjourning in a moment for lunch, and I hope you stick around and you chat with each other and carry on the conversation. But I also wanted to take this opportunity to make a little announcement, another plug for our happy hour, which Building Potential is hosting at Stoop Brewery. Stoop in Capitol Hill. And if you, if you're able to join us, we can continue to discuss topics that have been rising throughout the last 3 days. And I wanted to announce that Building Potential will be hosting another fall Members Plus. So that means it's a meeting, it's a social gathering, but also it's intellectually stimulating conversation. And that will be this fall. We haven't settled on a date yet, but I can give a little sneak preview that we will be having a conversation around building off of yesterday's plenary discussion on far enough, fast enough. How can we co-create a concept of building performance as a resource to recognize and incentivize flexible zero-emission buildings, microgrids, and virtual power plants? So come and talk about that topic with us. And if you are like, what are you talking about? Or I want to talk about that now. Come to the happy hour at 3:30 today and continue the conversation there. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming today, and enjoy your lunch.